This is the case about an 18-year-old girl working at McDonald's who was strip searched by her manager and her manager's fiance. On April 9, 2004, 18-year-old Louise Ogborn pulled into the McDonald's parking lot in Mount Washington, Kentucky to begin her shift. She was only planning to work in the morning, but as the day progressed, the restaurant got busier and busier. That's when 51-year-old assistant manager Donna Summers asked Louise if she would stay for the dinner rush. Louise was always willing to take on extra shifts, so she agreed. As the dinner rush continues, Donna receives a phone call from a man who identifies himself as Officer Scott. Officer Scott tells Donna that one of her employees is being accused by a customer of stealing $50 from her wallet. The customer couldn't remember the employee's name, but they did describe her as a petite blonde woman that was working at the cash register. As soon as Donna heard that description, she immediately knew that it was Louise Ogborn. Officer Scott tells Donna that there's two options. He can either go down to McDonald's and arrest Louise, or if she wants to avoid getting arrested, she can conduct a strip search on Louise inside her office. Donna feels like that's the better option, so she agrees. Calls Louise into her office, and as soon as Louise hears the allegations, she completely denies them. While the search is conducted, Officer Scott remains on the phone, and he's basically guiding Donna on what to do. Just to make sure that she isn't hiding the $50 inside her clothes, Officer Scott tells Donna to make Louise strip down. Donna brings in another employee named Kim to overlook the strip search, and Kim thinks that this is weird, so she asks Donna if this is okay. Donna asks Officer Scott, is this allowed? And he says that he has the McDonald's manager and a McDonald's corporate representative on the other line, and that they've approved of this strip search. So since corporate approved it, Donna and Kim continued. They made Louise take off all of her clothes, and she was just left in her bra and underwear. Then Officer Scott tells Louise to also remove those items. After this, Louise is left completely naked. Kim gives Louise a black little apron to use as a cover-up, and Officer Scott tells Donna and Kim to gather up all of Louise's belongings, put them inside a bag, and then go leave them outside in Louise's car. An officer would stop by later to grab the clothes and take them in as evidence. So now Louise is left inside this office without her phone, without her bag, without her car keys, and without her clothes. About an hour into the search, Donna needs to get back out there and run the restaurant, so she brings in another employee named Jason Bradley to watch over Louise. Jason picks up the phone, and Officer Scott tells him to remove Louise's apron and describe her body to him. He realizes that this is wrong, like no real officer would make you do this, so he hands the phone back to Donna and tells him he won't do this. This is when Donna called her 42-year-old fiance Walter Nix to come down to the restaurant and watch over Louise. And the abuse and torment just gets worse with Walter. Officer Scott tells Walter that he needs to make Louise remove her apron and perform a handful of exercises to see if the money would fall out of her body. He made Louise run in place, do jumping jacks, get up on the chair, turn around, bend over, all while being naked. If she didn't obey Walter's orders, Walter would punish her by spanking her. He spanked her for over 20 minutes, and he spanked her so hard that there were red marks left on her butt. Then Officer Scott tells Walter to make Louise give him a BJ. And Walter complies. So Officer Scott tells Walter to make Louise give him a BJ. How doing any of this relates to finding $50 doesn't make any sense. At this point, Louise has been inside this tiny, cramped office for over 3 hours. She has no car keys, no phone, no clothes, nothing. She says she felt trapped, she felt numb, and she was scared of what Walter might do to her if she didn't listen. So because Louise feared for her life, she complied. After giving Walter the BJ, Walter buckles up his pants and leaves the McDonald's. He doesn't even tell Donna why he's leaving. He just hands her the phone, walks away, gets inside his car, and calls his friend and says, "I did something bad." Walter knew that what he had just made Louise do was wrong. Why he complied? I don't know. After Walter leaves, Donna calls in an off-duty custodian named Thomas and asks him to watch over Louise. Thomas starts speaking over the phone to Officer Scott, and Officer Scott tells him to remove Louise's apron and describe her body to him. As soon as Thomas heard this, he knew that this was wrong, and he hung up the phone and told Donna that this was fake. This was not a real police officer, and he called the real cops and waited for them to arrive. When police looked back at the surveillance footage, they couldn't believe that this was real. How did these people fall for something so stupid? Just because someone tells you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. Yet Donna, Walter, and Kim went along with all of these commands from an Officer Scott. What's crazy is that this wasn't the first time that this had happened. These hoax calls had happened 73 times in over 31 states. Someone would call into the restaurant pretending to be a police officer investigating a crime, and he would make the managers at these restaurants perform these horrendous things. He would make these managers assault these young female employees, and the managers said that they went along with it because they genuinely thought that they were helping the police. It's crazy that this happened over 73 times, and no one had caught the caller yet. Police work hard to track down the caller, and they end up finding 38-year-old David Stewart. David Stewart was a husband, father of 5 correctional officers that lived in Panama City, Florida. And when police were investigating the calls, they discovered that they came from prepaid calling cards purchased from a Walmart in Panama City. And when they went to go look at the surveillance footage at these Walmarts, David Stewart appeared. On June 30th, 2004, David was charged with solicitation of sodomy and with impersonating a police officer, which are both felonies. His trial began in October of 2006, and he pled not guilty. His lawyer claims that there's no evidence to prove that David made these phone calls. Just because he bought the calling cards doesn't mean that he made the call. After weeks of a trial and 2 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with the verdict. They found David Stewart not guilty. One thing to note is that since David was arrested, there have allegedly not been any more hoax calls. As for Donna, she was indicted on a charge of unlawful imprisonment, and she served a year probation. As for her ex-fiance Walter, he was also charged and served 5 years in prison. Louise sued McDonald's and won $6 million. This is the case of 4 teenage girls that were brutally murdered inside a frozen yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. On Friday, December 6, 1991, 17-year-olds Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison were working the night shift at an I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop. The yogurt shop was very busy that night. There were a lot of customers, and at one point, Eliza's own mother even stopped by just to check in on her daughter, and everything seemed to be going well that night. At around 9:30 p.m. that night, Jennifer's younger sister Sarah stopped by the yogurt shop with her best friend Amy. The 2 girls were planning on having a sleepover later that night, so they went to the yogurt shop to wait for Jennifer to get off work so she could bring them back to Sarah's house. That night, the store was set to close at 11 p.m., and the rule was that 15 minutes before closing time, the girls needed to lock the front door. That way, any new customers wouldn't be able to get inside while the girls cleaned up and counted the money. So at 10:25 p.m. that night, Eliza and Jennifer began cleaning up the shop with the help of Sarah and her best friend Amy. At around 10:42 p.m., the final few customers were getting ready to leave the store when they noticed that the only people left inside were Amy, Eliza, Jennifer, and Sarah, plus 2 men. These 2 men were just sitting at a booth. They weren't even eating frozen yogurt. They were just having a can of soda, and they were whispering to each other and just acting kind of odd. One of the customers leaving was a woman, and she saw this and she thought it was a little bit strange, so before she left, she asked Eliza and Jennifer if they were okay. The girls said no, that they felt fine and that they were just cleaning up and then getting ready to leave soon. Eliza and Jennifer said goodbye to the woman. They locked the front door with the 2 men still inside the store and then went back to cleaning. 15 minutes later, it was 11 p.m. closing time, which meant that the store should have been completely clear of any customers, and the only people left inside should have been Eliza, Sarah, Jennifer, and Amy. However, 3 minutes after closing time at 11:03 p.m., there was a no sale rung up in the cash register. Now, next to the frozen yogurt shop was a party supply store, and at 11:47 p.m. that night, the owner of the party store realized that there was smoke coming from the yogurt shop and he could see flames inside. Firefighters immediately arrived to the scene, and as they were going through the building, they came across the nude bodies of 4 teenage girls: Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, and sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison. All 4 girls were found stripped, bound with their own clothing, and shot in the head. Police originally believed that this might have been a robbery gone wrong, but then they realized that there was still money inside the cash register. So if this was just a robbery, why did they leave the money behind? There were also no signs of a break-in. The front door was still locked, but the back door was unlocked and had been propped open with either a rock or a pack of cigarettes. Since the building had been lit on fire, any potential evidence was pretty much destroyed. Really wasn't much to go off of, but 8 days after the murders, police had made an arrest. 8 days after the murders, teenager Maurice Pierce was seen walking around the mall with a .22 caliber gun, same type of gun used to kill the girls. So police arrested him, and when they questioned him, he implicated 3 other boys: Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Forrest Welburn. All 4 men were brought down to the station for questioning, and of course they denied having anything to do with the murders. However, Maurice said that he lent his gun to Forrest Welburn, who then used that gun to commit the murders. Of course, when Forrest was asked about this, he denied having any involvement, and when police conducted a test to see if Maurice's gun would match the ballistics found at the crime scene, the test came back as not a match. So, due to lack of evidence, all 4 men were released. Now police were back to square one, and the case was pretty much stalled until October of 1999, 8 years after the murders. This is when the Austin Police Department arrested 4 men in connection to the crime. And police were already familiar with these 4 men. They were the same young men that they had arrested and released 8 years earlier. Now, at first, people were thinking that police had found some new evidence tying the 4 men to the murders, and that's why they were finally arrested. But no, police hadn't found any new evidence, and the only thing that they had was 2 newly obtained confessions. One from Michael Scott and the other from Robert Springsteen. Robert and Michael were interrogated for over 4 days, and they eventually confessed to killing the girls. They did implicate Forrest and Maurice, but when Maurice and Forrest were questioned, they never once confessed. So, since Maurice and Forrest never confessed to the murders and there really was no evidence tying them to the crime, the charges against the 2 of them were dropped. So, the only 2 people left to go through with the charges were Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen. Then, 10 years after the murders in 2001, the trials began. Both of their attorneys tried to argue that their confessions were 100% coerced. You can actually watch part of their interrogations on YouTube, but their defense attorney tried to argue that police berated the 2 men, and that's why they eventually broke down and confessed. At one point during the interrogation, a detective grabs a weapon and puts it against Michael's head and tells him to confess. They tried to recant their confessions, but in the end, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen were both found guilty of murder. However, 5 years after the trial, a judge overturned both of their convictions on the grounds that their constitutional rights were violated during the trial. Before they could be released from prison, police wanted to try one more time to see if they could tie these guys to the murder. During the autopsies, police had found a partial male DNA on one of the girls. And now, with the advancement of technology, police did a test to see if the DNA would match any of the 4 men, and it didn't. So, because of that, Michael and Robert were released. It's now been over 30 years since these 4 beautiful girls were murdered, and their killer remains on the loose. Police have yet to find the 2 men that were sitting at the booth, but a lot of people believe that they may be the ones responsible for the crime.